A lot is happening in the weather world over the next few days. We have a few severe weather outbreaks over the Midwest and the Northeast today, tomorrow. Widespread damaging winds and a few strong tornadoes are possible. So this is some very impactful weather for a lot of people. Millions are under the risk in some of the big cities in New England. We're also tracking a tropical system in the south that is getting its act together, forecast to move westward over the Gulf and impact a lot of the Gulf Coast states. Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, and Texas, all along that coast, we need to watch out for heavy rain, some storm surge, and potential tropical storm impacts. Today is Monday, July 20th. This is already going to be a bit of a longer video with so much happening out there. So without further ado, let's dive right into it. Alright, let's get started with a look at the weather pattern. I always say the weather pattern is the best way to understand what's happening and why it's happening. So we're going to have this big trough of low pressure. See all these cooler green and yellow colors over the Midwest into the Northeast. This is going to be our main driver of severe weather. We have a dip in the jet stream over here, and this is going to bring a lot of instability and energy to the region. Now on the other side, we have this big dark red blob building over Texas, over the southern plains. This is our ridge of high pressure, and notice how it really expands as we go into the late end of this week. This is going to be our next heat wave. So for the first part of the week, we have some severe thunderstorms, and then after that, the heat wave will become a lot more dominant and shut down severe weather, at least for a little bit. So here's a look at today's severe weather. We have a small, slight to marginal risk over North Carolina and portions of the mid-Atlantic. A few isolated to scattered stronger storms possible there. The main threat though is definitely this yellow to orange shade in the Midwest, centered really over Wisconsin and two parts of Iowa and northern Illinois. This is a level 3 out of 5, an enhanced risk of severe weather. These days are significant. It means numerous, potentially stronger severe storms with damaging winds. Tornadoes are actually a big threat today as well. Even in the green to yellow though, which extends a little bit further, encompasses all of Michigan, it does include Minneapolis, Sioux City. You want to watch out for some more scattered strong storms possible later this afternoon. As I mentioned, that tornado threat is locally significant across this region, especially in a corridor from eastern Iowa into most of Wisconsin. If you're in these hatched lines, that's where an EF2 or stronger tornado is possible. If that's definitely strong enough to do some more significant damage, you're definitely going to want to be staying weather aware later this afternoon and evening. The broader brown shade, this is where tornadoes are a little bit more likely in coverage. It includes Milwaukee and includes Eau Claire. The wind is the other big concern in these hatched lines. This is where significant 75-mile-per-hour plus winds are possible. So that's more than enough to cause some power outages and maybe snap some tree branches. So even if you don't get a tornado, the wind threat itself is significant, and that red shade, this is where the highest coverage of winds are expected. So today the threat is over the Midwest. Look at tomorrow how everything shifts to the southeast. So now we're tracking more of the Northeast, the Ohio Valley, into the Mid-Atlantic as our storm system progresses east. So we have another enhanced, a 3 out of 5 risk of severe weather. Cincinnati, you're just on the border, but it does include Pittsburgh, most of West Virginia. DC is also right on the border, but most of western Pennsylvania. This is a corridor of highest severe weather, and this could definitely even expand a little bit by the time we get to tomorrow. In the yellow though, the slight risk, it is pretty significant. It includes Cleveland, most of New York, New York City, Washington DC, Philadelphia. So a lot of big cities, a lot of people here under the gun for a pretty impactful day of severe weather tomorrow. There is another decent tornado risk, especially in this brown shade. That's where slightly higher coverage of tornadoes. Notice it does include the big cities, so DC, Philadelphia, New York. We all want to be on the lookout for some higher tornado potential tomorrow afternoon. We definitely want a tornado plan ready in case the warning gets issued near where you live. The wind threat is also looking very significant. The pink shade, that's a 45% chance, nearly a coin flip, that you see damaging winds within 25 miles of your place. But even the red and the yellow, we want to be on the lookout for some damaging winds capable of some power outages. Finally, to end off our storm system on Wednesday, everything continues moving further to the east. So Wednesday's threat definitely looks a lot lower than today and tomorrow, but especially over North Carolina and Virginia, kind of the same area again, we have another risk for a few scattered strong to severe thunderstorms. In particular, I want to check out the tornado potential. This is the significant tornado parameter. Today we have a very impressive corridor of higher end tornado potential somewhere across southwest Wisconsin to eastern Iowa. So this is why I am concerned with that slightly higher EF2 plus tornado risk today. Some of these values 5, 6, 7, even 8 or 9, that's toward the higher end of the scale. So if you're in some of these regions, we definitely want to be prepared for not just regular tornadoes, but maybe a stronger tornado or two in the mix. Tornado potential dies down tonight, but tomorrow we're watching now the Northeast, and maybe not as strong as today, but there is a pretty expansive corridor where the environment will support a few of these tornadoes in some of these green and yellow shades. So tracking it all out, I will say today there is actually a lot of uncertainty with how the afternoon thunderstorms develop. So this morning we have a decaying cluster of storms moving through portions of Illinois and Wisconsin, and exactly how the rest of these storms decay will determine where the afternoon storms set up. So it's a very complex scenario. In general though, it does look like these scattered lines to even supercells will be forming by 6 or 7 o'clock. So as we get a little bit closer to sunset, now some of these storms initially definitely could be rotating and definitely could be supercellular. Don't focus on the specifics because some of these storms could shift shift to the west, could shift to the east, but maybe we have a significant corridor of a few of these supercells moving through southern Wisconsin, as well as portions of eastern Wisconsin as we get towards sunset. Now, as we go through the later on, eventually these storms will cluster more into at least somewhat of a line of storms as they move towards Chicago. Chicago, your threat looks to be once the sun sets, so around 9-10 o'clock, but some more storms also moving through Michigan, so western Michigan. Something that the HRRR is not really showing much of is storms over Iowa. We do have a few of these cells here that could carry a brief tornado risk, maybe some gusty winds. Some of our other models though are developing a much bigger complex in central Iowa, which could impact Des Moines, Waterloo, Cedar Rapids. So I would say weather aware in that region. Even if this particular model isn't that aggressive, there definitely could be some more stronger storms with some damaging winds and tornadoes. Storms will eventually be moving south. Once we get past midnight into early Tuesday morning, most of these storms will be weakening, but just some scattered activity possible moving through central Indiana, Illinois, and maybe extending a little bit further back west into Nebraska and northern Missouri. So waking up on Tuesday, we're going to have some morning showers and downpours along the I-95 corridor. These will not be severe. It could be some locally heavy rain for your morning drive to work. What we're watching though, this bigger complex out to the west, as it moves eastward, it's going to encounter a lot more energy and instability, and this will re-spark scattered to numerous strong thunderstorms. It's going to get pretty messy. Look at this whole region. We just have a lot of activity happening all the way from Kentucky into New York, even up to Canada. There's a lot of storms. It does look like some of these individual clusters of storms could turn supercellular, so this is why we have that slightly higher tornado threat, especially closer toward the Atlantic coast. That's where I think some of the slightly stronger tornado potential might lay. So DC, we could be getting a few storms, maybe a few tornadic storms nearby as we go into 4 or 5 o'clock with some of these clusters. It's also not just going to be one round of storm, there'll be multiple clusters of storms moving through. So this will also promote a slightly higher flash flood risk because we can get multiple storms with heavy rain that could quickly add up some rainfall totals. Now, as we go into the evening, everything will slowly be pivoting off the coast, but still some additional just wet and occasionally stormy weather all the way from Maine, New York, and just really much of New England. Notice along Kentucky, we could get a slightly stronger damaging wind complex of storms moving through as we go into the evening hours. So if you're living in really the whole state of Kentucky and much of Tennessee, these storms could eventually make it to Tennessee as we go toward midnight. Definitely be on the guard for a pretty intense squall line that could move through later on into the evening. Storms will be eventually wrapping up as we go overnight in the northeast. We could still have one more round of some lingering storms. These are less likely to be severe. The bigger wind and tornado potential is earlier in the evening. And then as we're waking up on Wednesday morning, notice how everything is just moving off the coast. We still have some lingering storms around Virginia and North Carolina. This is where that day 3 slight severe weather risk is present on Wednesday. So it's a really active pattern. We have a lot of activity, but definitely watching out for some of that tornado potential today and tomorrow, as well as damaging winds with just a very soggy and stormy day across the northeast and mid-Atlantic. So we have those potential severe weather outbreaks in the north. We also have a tropical depression in the Gulf, and this is something that'll be very interesting to watch over the next few days. You can see the swirl of low pressure. We do have a closed circulation just to the south of the panhandle of Florida. Something about the structure of this storm, a lot of the stronger thunderstorms are displaced to the south of the actual structure. You can see on the northern end we do have some activity, but a lot more of it is to the south. This is because we have some pretty strong northerly wind shear up in the higher levels of the atmosphere, and this is going to be one of the biggest factors working against the storm moving forward. So just tracking the cone forward, this storm will be moving to the west. It will likely strengthen to a tropical storm, so tropical storm Bertha. This will be our second storm of the season, and all along the Gulf Coast we need to watch out for this with this westward track from Louisiana, Mississippi, and then the Texas coast. You're potentially in the path of the system. So taking a look at these spaghetti models, it's been a long time since we've had a look at these. This is all the different computer models, and each of these paths is a different model's idea where the center of the storm may go. So we do have a lot of agreement in that westward moving path along the coast. The biggest question though is how far south this storm makes it, because if this storm does track over land, if it makes landfall along Louisiana, like the current center of the cone is predicting, this would result in a weaker storm. We could still have a tropical storm making landfall with winds about 40 to 50 miles per hour, so still some wind impacts, but then our storm could get kind of ripped apart over Louisiana as it encounters a lot of land. However, if it stays a little bit more in the southern path, we have a lot of warm water on the ocean. So even though other environmental factors are against this storm, this warm water itself might be enough to allow it to intensify. If it stays over the open warm waters, it could be dealing with a stronger end tropical storm, and the storm would pose much more of a threat to Texas because it holds together a lot better. So those are the two scenarios right now that we're tracking very closely. Either way, some heavy rain and some storm surge is looking likely from the panhandle of Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, and then Louisiana, including New Orleans. If you're in this yellow corridor, you're under the potential for the higher storm surge, potentially 2 to 4 feet. So this could inundate some beaches, maybe cause some minor flooding, nothing too terribly significant, but definitely noteworthy. The blue shade, that's a little bit less, but still significant, significant 1 to 3 inch storm surge. And of course, we're also dealing with a lot of heavy rain potential along the coast. So let's check out those two scenarios I mentioned with two of our different high resolution models. I put on the wind field so that we can see the swirl of low pressure very clearly here with our storm. You can see our closed circulation over the water. So that's our tropical system. All models agree that it'll be moving westward, and as it do so, it'll definitely be bringing some of those heavier rain bands on shore. So the coast of Florida, Tallahassee later today, and the Pensacola later tomorrow. Definitely expect some of these scattered storms to contain some briefly heavy rain. One thing though to note is the majority of the heavy rain will actually be on the southern side of the storm. That's all thanks to those strong northerly winds that I was mentioning earlier. It's going to displace a lot of the stronger activity further south. So this is good news for the US. It means most of the heavy rain will just fall over the open waters of the Gulf and result in a much lower flood threat than is usual with a tropical system this close to the US onshore. But even still, any of these rain bands that do move onshore, they could contain some very torrential rainfall, some tropical downpours. So we still want to watch out for some isolated flooding. Now, as we go later into tomorrow, notice how we go closer to Alabama, Mississippi. The HRRR is following the cone pretty closely. This is where, though, this model indicates a storm making landfall somewhere near the tip of Louisiana. Still, most of the thunderstorm and heavy rain activity is displaced to the south, so this is good news for Louisiana in itself in reducing the heavy rainfall footprint. But with a slightly northern track, we would expect the storm to weaken over Louisiana and then kind of fall apart and not even make it to Texas. So if it tracks a little bit further to the north, the impacts would be confined to Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida. By contrast, here's the RRFS model, and this model is on the southern side of the guidance. So it still has a storm following the cone pretty closely. Notice this model brings a few pretty intense rain bands way out ahead of the storm, so something we're definitely watching across Louisiana as we go Tuesday into Wednesday. Watch closely though how the center of the circulation skips to the south of the state of Louisiana itself. So maybe we have a brief brush with landfall, but it develops back over the open waters and stays far enough south where a storm isn't torn apart by the land. And what this means is, as a result, this model strengthens the storm and brings it right up to Texas. This is a pretty strong looking storm, maybe a higher end tropical storm approaching the coast of Texas as we go Thursday into Friday. Which of those two scenarios happen? Does it go over Louisiana and weaken, or does it stay further south and strengthen? We still don't know at this time. I will say the trend has been toward that northern track, meaning less impacts to Texas, a weaker tropical system. But just in case that southern track happens, we do still want to stay weather aware in Texas. The most immediate impacts definitely look to be in those areas a little bit further east where some storm surge and some briefly heavy rain is possible. So between those two systems, we have a pretty active pattern on hand. Let's end this video talking with temperatures, because I did mention that we have another heat wave building later on in this week as high pressure really strengthens over the southern US. Anywhere in these dark brown colors, this is where we could have heat indices of 100 to 110 degrees. So it's going to be very hot. Omaha could be feeling like 106. Memphis could be feeling like 103. This isn't your air temperature. This is a heat index, so your feels like temperature. Tomorrow we could have a core of heat setting up over the southern US. So it's going to be very hot from Oklahoma into Arkansas and really just much of the deep south. Now, the one area that's not going to be hot, I talked about this in my last video, is the Midwest and Northeast. Behind our strong severe thunderstorms over the next few days, we're going to have a cold front bringing some pretty unseasonably cool air for this time of year. So for July standards, it's going to feel very pleasant across the north. Wednesday morning, we could have widespread 40s and 50s waking up. So this is very unusual for this time of year. You might even need a light jacket for summer. Highs only in the 60s and 70s in these green and yellow shades. It's going to be a night and day difference though to the south, where heat indices will continue to be pushing 100, even 110 degrees. As we go later on to the week, some cooler air lingers in the north, the hot weather continues in the south, and then eventually the hot air in the south will expand a little bit back further to the north. But for the Midwest and the Northeast, you'll get a much welcome reprieve from the heat. Meanwhile, we'll be absolutely baking across much of the southern, central, and western US. So that's all today in the weather world. Thanks so much for sticking with me. A bit of a longer video. We have a lot of different things to track, but if you're under those severe weather risks, definitely make sure you're staying weather aware. We could have a few of those stronger tornadoes, so that definitely deserves your attention. And then we'll be watching that tropical system further to the south very closely. I'll have an update video sometime in the next few days once it looks a little bit more likely exactly how strong and exactly how far west the storm will make it before it falls apart. If you don't want to miss any of that, consider subscribing to the Weather World. I always have weather updates on what's happening around the country. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching again, and have a great rest of your day.